I'm going to talk about electromagnetic interference with medical implants. You might ask, why does a geophysicist get to do this? And what do I know about this? As a professor of geophysics, I study earthquakes, volcanoes, minerals, oil, all kinds of other things, even the environmental contamination, groundwater infrastructure, and the moon and planets. I worked on some of the stuff that went on Apollo 17 and the moon. We do this by making electrical and magnetic measurements, and electromagnetic measurements are very sensitive in nature. So sensitive, in fact, that some of my students were trying to make measurements, and we're having trouble with cell phone interference with their measurements. I'll come back to that in a second. I have a lot of material to cover, so I'm going to talk really fast. I tend to talk really fast anyway. So what are EMI and RFI? Interference is an unwanted effect, such as the music playing too loud for you to hear a phone conversation, signal to the music listener but noise to the phone user. EMI is electromagnetic interference. It's electric or magnetic fields producing an unwanted effect at low frequencies, typically by induction. RFI is the same thing, only it's radio frequencies at high frequencies. I also will make this presentation available to anybody who wants it. It's about an 18 megabyte PowerPoint. EMI, RFI with geophysics, cell phones, radio, TV, and power lines are all sources of signal to users, but of noise and interference to geophysicists. Natural fields from the Earth and Sun are both sources of noise and interference and also signal. The Earth has a 500 milligauss magnetic field at DC. The noise varies as a function of frequency. It's not a simple way to talk about it. It has a minimum at about 1 kilohertz because of the waveguide that exists between the Earth and the ionosphere. So there's a very strong frequency dependence to noise. We use that as signal sometimes to explore inside the Earth. So what's desirable signal and what's an unwanted noise depends on the problem and perspective, like the music on the phone. These are some of my students. Do we have a laser pointer? I think we do. I brought my own. These are some of my students not far from here on Morrison, on Dinosaur Ridge. There's a student on top belaying this one with a radar system, running up and down the ridge to try and map footprints that are hidden like this one underneath the sand sheet. She's operating a 900 megahertz center frequency radar system. The time we did this 10 years ago, there was a 900 megahertz analog cell phone system around. It doesn't exist anymore. They took it off the air and we're all digital now. But the analog ones, people would drive by on the road, which is down here where my Jeep is. They would see us climbing on the rocks, and there's signs that say, "Do not climb on the rocks," and they'd call the sheriff on their cell phone. Every time they picked up the cell phone to make that call, they interfered with our measurements, and we had to do it over again. The question I'm often asked is, this 900 megahertz radar system, is it not dangerous to use? It uses 1/1,000,000th of the power of a cell phone you hold next to your head. Intentionally, so we're not allowed to interfere with the cell phones. I also have a medical implant in my head. I have a deep brain stimulator for Parkinson's disease. In my chest there's a pacemaker, which is this red thing down here, a wire that runs up my neck, around behind my ear to the top of my head where you see these two bumps, then electrodes that come down behind my eyes. This is a great antenna. It picks up all kinds of things it shouldn't pick up. So interference with medical implants is something I was very, very concerned about before I got this installed. But I had the choice between taking the medicines, and the side effects of the medicines were accumulating and worsening the disease, or having this installed, so I chose this. They tell me they can reverse it and remove it someday, but we'll see. So there are medical implants in about 20 to 25 million Americans today, I'm told by the NIH. It's a huge, about 8 to 10% of the population of adults. Cardiac pacemakers, defibrillators, neurostimulators like the deep brain stimulator. This is not just used for Parkinson's disease, but also obsessive compulsive disorder, depression, and a lot of other things. Infusion pumps for diabetes. I just got this today. This is the IEEE, the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers. There's 300,000 members who are electrical engineers in the United States. This is their magazine. This is about medical implants for hearing and other things. The latest of which were invented at MIT using infusion pumps for diabetes and other stuff like that. There is no mention in this article, this is the November issue, of electromagnetic interference with them. Artificial hearts, metal rods to support broken bones, spinal stimulators to speed healing, hearing aids, all kinds of things. One of the definitions of an implant is having a minimum lifespan of 3 months, as penetrating living tissue, as having a physiological interaction, as being retrievable. There is no tracking for medical implant devices in the United States. But NIH says they've been used widely for more than 40 years, and it's estimated that 8 to 10% of Americans, 20 to 25 million people currently have such devices of some sort in their bodies. You remember the old caution microwave oven in use signs? They got around that by making better microwave ovens and better cardiac pacemakers. They shielded the wires, and the wires only have to go from a pacemaker right next to the heart, not up to the brain like this one does in my head, so I'm much more vulnerable. These things can interfere with and prevent normal therapeutic function, reset or reprogram the device, bring damaging energy into the body or the device, or cause injury, including death. I'm very interested in this because I've got one in me, so I wanted to know all there was to know about it. And it's very hard to find out that there's this information. Any metal object can act as an antenna. If the metal is not the right size, shape, and orientation, it will not be very efficient, but still an antenna. A good example is a metal tooth filling that can be a radio receiver. It's the whole receiver, it's the antenna, and it's the crystal oscillator, because it's a diode. All the red parts in the DBS system in my head and chest are metal, so they're all antennas of different sizes and shapes, picking up different kinds of energy. The Medtronic's Kinetra DBS patient manual before I had the device installed didn't say anything about EMI and RFI. After I got it installed, they handed me a new manual they just had printed, and it had 16 pages of EMI warnings against cardiac defibrillators, which generate 1 kilovolt. That's the plates they put on your chest, like you see in the picture in the background. Diathermy and MRI. Theft detectors in security gates, airports, schools, courts, libraries, and retail stores have these devices now. CB or ham radios, TV or radio transmitting towers, electric arc welding equipment. My son has that in his high school. I can't go visit certain parts of the high school because of that. Induction heaters and industrial blast furnaces, power lines, electric substations, generators, and cell phones. That's their list. I'll show you a couple examples. Shortwave, microwave, or ultrasonic diathermy is for deep heat treatment. From the Medtronic's Kinetra manual, it says energy from diathermy can be transferred through your implanted system, causing tissue damage and can result in severe injury or death. It's a quote from their manual. Quote again from their manual. Performing MRI, magnetic resonance imaging with this equipment can cause lesions, resulting in serious and permanent injury, including coma, paralysis, or death. These are the pulses that are going into my head from the pacemaker. I measured this myself because it turns out there's no way to do this. They trust when they program it that it does what it tells them to, but they have no way of verifying that. And the doctors told me this is a real innovation right here. I measure things in geophysics normally. I don't normally measure bodies, but I figured out a way to do this. The pulse height, pulse repetition frequency, and the pulse width are the important parameters that we're allowed to vary. Pulse repetition frequency turns out to be very interesting. If you walk through a metal detector at the airport or at a lot of places like courtrooms these days, security systems generate 374,000 nanotesla. Divide by 100 to get milligauss. That's 3,741 milligauss. You were worried about 3 milligauss before. They operate at 100 to 3,500 hertz, according to the FDA measurements. 185 hertz is where I operate, my DBS. I haven't walked through the metal detectors at the airport. I'm supposed to go around them, and I have a card in my wallet that says in 25 languages I will set it off, and I shouldn't go through it. I haven't tried yet.